my world got smaller and smaller as I seemed to trigger from almost anything, including like getting in a pool. I triggered from the chlorine, and I would trigger in an argument with my husband, just like with the escalation of my emotions. Sometimes it would happen if I ever actually was intimate with my husband, that would be a trigger. So it felt like it was like closing in on me. You know, what was there left?
Disinformation is spreading.
There will be a
We only have
surprise
so many
outbreak.
beds.
Is the issue of pandemic?
No social distancing at all.
They said that they would express their concerns about the mask supply.
Where's the mask? Where's the glove?
A second wave is
we all need some good news.
A message for all the healthcare workers out there.
Thank you.
If you're looking for hope tonight, raise your hand. If you feel alone and don't understand, if you're fighting the fight of your life, then stand.
From Santa Rosa, California, this is 19 Stories. I'm Cheryl Halling. My guest, Daniele, is the founder of Daniele Communications, a boutique PR firm specializing in literary, hospitality, entertainment, political, and nonprofit public relations. Known for her media relations savvy, creative branding, and social media expertise, Diana began her career while she was earning her master's degree from the Annenberg School of Communication and Journalism at the University of Southern California. She completed a study, How Barbie Speaks Sexually to Children, at USC's Institute for the Study of Women and Men, a feminist think tank studying how women's gender roles are portrayed in film and television. After completing her research, Diana stayed on to work with both the press and sponsors such as Paramount Pictures, DreamWorks, and NBC Universal. Over the years, she has represented the Beverly Hills Hotel, Saks Fifth Avenue, Ralph Lauren, KUSC-FM Classical Radio, AMC Theaters, Rock the Vote, and the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation, and many others. She has also worked in an international diplomatic capacity, running publicity for and organizing outreach events at the United States Embassy's Cultural Center in Madrid, Spain. A Phi Beta Kappa graduate of the University of California, Los Angeles, Diana has completed coursework in English literature at the University of Cambridge, England, and earned her bilingual certificate from the University of Madrid, Complutense. As impressive as all of Diana's aforementioned credits are, quite possibly the most important work she's done is a recent completion of her memoir, Out of the Dark, a memoir of migraine and madness, which chronicles the years that she suffered from severe and debilitating migraines while continuing to run her business, being a wife, and raising 3 children. Daniele, welcome to 19 Stories.
Oh, thank you, Cheryl. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm delighted that we're finally connecting after all these years. It's been some time. So how are you doing today?
Today is a good day, and actually every day is a good day when you don't have a migraine. And I am specifically out there trying to make an invisible disease visible. This month is National Migraine and Health Awareness Month. So it's a pretty big thing for me and my work.
Which we're going to talk a lot about, and I think it's very apropos that you're joining me during this month. We didn't plan that, but it just so happened that our recording fell during this month. And to give a bit of context to how you and I know each other, we met around 25 years ago when we both signed up for a small group study of Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way at our former church in Los Angeles. And for those who may be unfamiliar with The Artist's Way, perhaps you can tell our listeners what that book is about.
Well, The Artist's Way, and I think the author Julia Cameron just published like a 25-year anniversary edition. It's about finding a way to connect with your higher self and your creativity and living that. One of the things that most writers do that was first proposed and kind of outlined in The Artist's Way is to write 3 pages in just a regular old ratty notebook. Every morning, 3 pages, they're called morning pages, and you just spill out everything on the page. But you usually find something in there that you can work with. And it's just a wonderful book, and I was delighted to get to know you then, and I'm even happier to know you now.
And I didn't know that she just published a 25-year anniversary edition of that. It's very cool. So it's kind of on spot as to when you and I first met. Appreciate you filling us in on that information, because if my memory serves me, you joined that group as you were just beginning to explore your creative writing and had a vision for writing your own book someday. Is that correct?
That is correct. It was a different book I was writing at the time. I had lived in Madrid, as you mentioned at the top of the show, and it was more about, my life acculturating to Spain. But having lived through what I've lived through, that became an even more important theme and issue for me to write about. And it really actually helps me, deal with some of the pain that caused. I'm not talking about the migraine pain, like physical, but emotional through writing the story.
So much of what I remember about you, Diana, is your beautiful energy, your smile, your zest for life. That, and along with your impeccable class and style, made for a perfect personality to be a publicist at the level you were prior to when your migraines started to present themselves. And we hear the term publicist a lot in Hollywood, and as it relates to other businesses, everyone seems to have a publicist, especially now in this social media world we live in. However, we may not really know the day-to-day details and demands of the caliber of public relations you provided. So if you wouldn't mind, can you give us a glimpse into what a publicist actually does?
Well, there's a lot of things that fall under the public relations rubric. There's launching special events. There's marketing, which a lot of students in college were major in marketing. And there is social media marketing, which has become very important. But the publicity, which is the same as media relations, the work where the person is specifically talking to a TV news producer or a journalist, a columnist, that's my forte. And that's the kind of thing that you can bring to a client that they can't do themselves, because usually they don't spend their life like connected with the media and knowing them by name.
Well, and also we know that there's so much more power when someone else speaks about you than if you speak about yourself. Because if you talk about yourself, you just sound arrogant. If someone says the exact same thing, then you're like, ooh, I want to get to know more about them.
That's so true. I think I'll hire you as my new business person.
Okay, I'll hire you as my publicist. You can hire me as your business person. So you're living this glamorous life of red carpet events and, as I mentioned, representing one of the most renowned hotels and high-end retailers in all the world, really, the Beverly Hills Hotel, Saks Fifth Avenue. You studied at Cambridge and worked for the United States Cultural Center in Madrid, which you just touched upon. And I'd love for you to first share how that came about, as I imagine that kind of diplomatic work served you really well in the entertainment and fashion business.
Yes, I think so. And it all kind of, like, the personal is the political. And I was already working. I started as a journalist. I got my master's at USC at Annenberg, and I was working as a journalist, but I just didn't have that, like, kind of go for the jugular investigative, like, side to me. And so when I was introduced to public relations, I thought, this is a real fit for my personality, and I like spinning things and seeing the angles. So they call it hopping over the fence from being in journalism to being a publicist. And I had a situation where I had never been out of the country. And so while I was working in PR, my small boutique firm in Venice, helmed by Josh Barron, who is like the publicist, we got bought by Edelman Worldwide, which is a national PR firm. And that's all exciting because they have offices in Madrid and Kuala Lumpur. But the truth is, if you're in the LA office, you're working on LA clients. So it's not really an international experience. And I just realized that I was never going to have lived in a foreign country, and I would never be bilingual, which is something I'd always been interested in. I'd studied Spanish in high school, and I passed the AP, and I won this award at my high school. And so I was very interested in, like, making that work. And the only way to really get fluent is either have one of your parents is fluent and speaks to you as a child, or going to live in the country. And so I applied for a Rotary International Scholarship, and I won, and I went.
I'm not surprised by that, Diana, because like I say, when I met you and just your energy and passion for everything that you did, what you set your sight on, and which is why you've been so successful with your public relations on behalf of your clients, is that you get things done. And the follow-up to that question is how seemingly out of nowhere, your life is drastically interrupted by a deep decline into darkness as a result of debilitating migraines and depression, or as you refer to the peanut butter and jelly of the psychiatry world, as you can't have one without the other. And in reading about your story and why we're talking about it now for so many reasons, just the importance of giving light to it, the fact that it is Migraine Awareness Month, and there's something else going on we'll touch on before we go, is people think of migraines as, oh, it's just an occasional bad headache. And as a woman, when I was younger and pre and perimenopausal, they were cyclical. They were always related to hormones. And so you could almost set your clock by it. But yours was something different. So what happened? And do you know the origins of where these migraines came from?
Well, no, and they're supposed to be also, Cheryl, genetic. And when I'd be talking to a doctor, I would say there is no history of hormones on either side of my family tree. And they would kind of be like, oh, well, that's interesting, but let's move on because now you have them.
Migraines, you mean?
Yes.
At least they could discount that. It sounds like, well, okay, it's not genetic. We can move on from there. Is that what you're saying?
Well, they never could explain why I had them. But then, of course, you're trying to not have them. And so trying to treat it is more important than trying to find out how you got it because now you have it. So let's just go from there kind of thing. But mine started in I kind of backed into chronic migraine. I was having these dizzy spells where I would pass out. And I would specifically pass out like at the grocery store with all the bright lights and, all the things on the shelves, or at a very pounding kind of Forever 21 is one of the places that I passed out. And I went to the doctor because they thought it was a vestibular issue or it could have been like a heart issue because I was syncope. I was like passing out. And so before I actually got to the neurologist, I went to a cardiologist and then an ear, nose, and throat person because of the inner ear controlling, being dizzy or your balance.
Sure.
And before I got to the neurologist, I had my first migraine with the pain, like a real one. I was having these symptoms and it was kind of like a buildup. And then one day it started in May and in August, it all was over. And that's when it began.
Do you mind sharing how old you were when they first presented themselves?
I was in my 30s.
Oh, really?
I would have to think about exactly mid 30s. And they were tied to hormones, which is actually not a good thing because if you get a trigger from eating chocolate, you can stop eating chocolate or drinking coffee if those are triggers, but you cannot control your hormones. They're just going to go up and down and all around like a roller coaster and you can't ride them. So I ended up having the migraines. Seemingly the hormone was the biggest one, but my world got smaller and smaller as I seemed to trigger from almost anything, including getting in a pool. I triggered from the chlorine, and I would trigger in an argument with my husband, just with the escalation of my emotions. Sometimes it would happen if I ever actually was intimate with my husband, that would be a trigger. So it felt like it was like closing in on me. What was there left? So eating was a problem. If I didn't get enough sleep, that would cause a migraine.
I can see where, headaches, I know when even today, thank God I don't get migraines as bad as I used to. I get them once in a while, but we're talking for your life. And we'll talk more about this, especially since you just completed your memoir, Out of the Dark, as I mentioned, a memoir of migraine and madness. Congratulations, by the way, on this huge accomplishment, because I know it's not the book that you were envisioning when you and I first met, but you take the reader through your years with chronic migraine and the unconventional and complete healing, which we'll talk about in a moment. Then, as we just discussed, because mental illness is a comorbidity with migraine, you bravely write about your descent into mental illness, specifically anxiety and depression. And a couple of things that you mention in your excerpts, you talk about your self-imposed stay at UCLA Psych Ward and of your month at a rather posh rehabilitation center in Malibu, which you describe in another excerpt, the Malibu 12. Can you describe how migraines led to the depression that you were suffering from, and then where your bravery and resolve came from in reaching out to the resources that you did to address it?
Well, I think one of the themes in the memoir is that you could never give up on yourself and that you have to have faith. You could never give up and never give up on yourself. So I was happily supported by my husband. I tended to feel like I had no friends when I was going through this. I had a few very good friends because my world was so small, but those people lifted me up and helped me find opportunities, things I could visit, places I could go, psychiatrists I could see that might be able to heal me. I have to just say something because I just realized I haven't published the book yet. So all these excerpts are leading up to the hopeful publication. It's not coming out on shelves like tomorrow. I'm looking for the literary agent so that I can sell it and get it traditionally published, because almost everything written about migraines is self-published. You have to be able to inject humor and pathos in it. And so I'm going to be that person. And there's two things we're talking about it. That anxiety and depression go together like peanut butter and jelly. It also is true that it's a comorbidity. That's fully true. But when I said it at the time in my writing, it was for those two, depression and anxiety. But I think it works. The same analogy works for, migraines. Upwards of like 65% of people who have chronic or very debilitating migraines have mental illness. My fondest hope would be that I could tag all these literary agents I'm with on social media, and I might get the agent to move it forward.
So that our listeners are aware, these excerpts that I'm referring to are on your website. So all the literary agents out there listening to this, visit Diana's website. We'll tag that at the end, both in show notes and tell you where to go. They're fascinating reading, and also just the way that you are able to express yourself, Diana, and be so vulnerable and honest and add humor in the midst of some pretty gut-wrenching truths that you share. So I want to thank you for that. And referring to the website, you and the excerpts from your book, one of them is called Daddy's Girl. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind reading that for us.
I would be pleased and happy to. As you know, when you lose someone, the best thing someone can do is ask the person about their name and who they were. And I would love to read Daddy's Girl. I also want to say that on my website, there are the 5 excerpts. They were previously published in literary journals and also on Zibby Owens's Moms Don't Have Time to Write. So they've all appeared for the whole public. And then I have them, embedded on my author page on the website. So it's not like a blog. They've all been published before. Okay, so now I'm going to read Daddy's Girl. A light breeze ruffles the Southern California palm fronds outside my car window, and the new morning chill, signaling the definitive end of summer, hits me as I open the door. Surveying the clear cobalt sky above me, I consider my migraine meteorology report. Light pressure with a scratchy, persistent ache. Still, the pain is manageable. It's early yet. As I cross the parking lot, I hear his booming voice behind me. Hey, Diva, wait up. I turn to see my father's face, his ruddy cheeks crinkling up to his eyes, with smiling greeting. I allow myself to be folded into his arms. Hi, Daddy, I say. My mother is Mom, but he is Daddy. We walk into the organic market together, wordlessly gathering the best of the orange orbs stacked atop each other, as well as granola, nuts, and other tasty treats that will constitute my son's flag football team snack later today. Pick these up back at the house after your appointment, he instructs as we part. It takes only a few minutes to arrive at the chiropractor's office, and soon I am lying prone on the white papered table, awaiting the adjustment. The leather donut presses into my tender forehead as I feel the crack. I hold my breath for a moment, allowing myself to hope that this will curtail my pain and keep today's migraine attack at bay. Afterwards, I drive back to pick up the snacks, pulling up in front of the traditional dormer-winded home I'd grown up in. Inside, my petite apron mother approaches from the kitchen, handing me a plastic container of orange slices and a bulging grocery bag. Peering into my face, she runs her fingers along my brow, kneading its creases gently. Is it helping? She asks. Yes, I lie and make a quick exit. The pounding in my head is sadly intensifying, a foreshadowing the ice pick come machete machinations to come. I need to get home to the dark room. I had gratefully escaped inside my best friend, sleep, when the cell on my nightstand goes off. The blaring ring punctuates the bedroom's welcomed silence. I consider not answering, but I need the ringing to stop, as each note feels like the turn of a knife inside my skull. I put the phone up to my ear and am surprised to hear my brother's voice. Strange, he prefers to text. Dad had a heart attack. Pause. Dad's unconscious. Pause. Dad's dead. I drop the phone as if it's on fire and throw myself from the bed. I run to the bathroom, kneel, and retch. Hovering over the toilet bowl, I marvel at the enormity of my physical pain and the jagged, ragged stabs that threaten to crack my skull. The throbbing is so powerful, it usually keeps me from any coherent thought. That strange, non thinking peace that is the reward of the chronically ill. No, I hear myself wail. My voice sounds tinny and far away. I want to wrap myself up in the pain and cease to exist, as he so traitorously has. I flash ahead to the funeral and see myself crawling inside the casket and closing the lid. I will rest in painless peace with him, buried alive, my daddy's girl.
Thank you for being willing to share that. I'm when I read that about what you were going through physically and just trying to show up for your family every day, and then knowing how close you were to your dad and trying to deal with that in the midst of your own crisis. And you have a quote on your website, and it's not your quote, it's by
At Sabal, I think. It's the one about story.
Yes, which large part of the reason I have this podcast is to share people's stories because they're so important in how they can touch other people's lives. And it says, tell me a fact and I'll learn. Tell me a truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story. It will live in my heart forever. And that story has resonated and kind of not haunted me in a bad way, but haunted me in that just thinking about the enormity of what you were dealing with and coming through at a time when you really needed your support system. Again, I appreciate you being willing to read that and share that, Diana. You know, your other excerpt, Volunteering, where you wrote a very honest take on where you were in the midst of your depression and your fight to regain some sense of normalcy in, as you say, the world by volunteering at a senior rehab facility, and how that was such a pivotal point in healing from the depression you were in. You say, in the same way depression creeps in, it recedes. Can you speak to what that meant for you?
Well, what it meant for me is just to go through a short little timeline. I had chronic migraines from 2009 to 2014 for 5 years, not to the day, but to the month. And then after I got over the chronic migraine, you would think, oh, well, the book is over. But yet there's so much left. And that is because of the comorbidity between migraine and mental illness. And while I had the chronic migraines, I was on a very small dose of an antidepressant because it's pretty depressing. As you can realize, like my dad passing was like a huge straw that broke me, and I couldn't even like why would I want to keep living? I can't handle this too. Like, how much can I handle?
Yeah.
Of course, I did handle it, but that was something that almost broke me. But anyways, when I got over the migraine, I started having what I noticed as a very strong, like heartbeat anxiety, like feeling like I might be having a heart attack, panic attacks that were different now that I was walking around, not horizontal, but vertically where there was light, because, I was in a dark room with no light laying down. And I was trying to live my life and I felt so anxious. So I went to go see a therapist because I told her I have anxiety. And she told me, Diana, you have anxiety and depression. And I said, no, I don't feel depressed. And she said, they go together like peanut butter and jelly. And I didn't believe her, but sure enough, within another 30 days, I was starting to go down that slope, not wanting to talk to anyone, not wanting to get out of, like, it just came on. But I was researching migraines because I'm in an advocacy program, and actually talk about being a statistic that it's exactly like people who get mental illness from having the migraines start out with only the anxiety presents first. So exactly what happened to me happens to many.
And the anxiety, I would imagine, comes from just being so anxious about doing anything and having a trigger. When you describe that everything, chlorine, sexual relations, everything that you were doing, working out. I mean, how does one go about their life when you wonder, if I get out of bed and do anything, is it going to just mean pain for me today? And having that awareness is got to be, sometimes if we're ignorant to something, we don't know versus, having that awareness going, oh my gosh, what do I do with this?
Yeah. And I do think like when I was had the first migraine that lasted like 11 days.
Oh, wow.
And I ended up getting into a neurologist who gave me the steroids to make it go away. Like by the time you're on day 5, they're gone. But I still had this headache, but a different, like a more squeezing, but I wasn't out of pain. And I said, "What is this?" And he said, "Well, you have chronic daily headache." So it's like even when I didn't have a migraine, I had, I talk about my meteorology report because my mind was always in some stage of pain.
I read a really startling statistic in the information that you share. I believe it's on your website, that there are more than 1 billion people who suffer from migraines worldwide. That figure includes 39 million Americans, with 2/3 of those being women. One of the oldest ailments known to humankind, migraine has often been called a women's issue. And you quote the cliche, "Not tonight, dear, I have a headache," which pokes fun at the plight of the millions of women who suffer in silence but have no voice. You just touched upon it, that you're part of a campaign and an influencer, if you will. And I think it was in June of 2020, you were chosen by the Association of Migraine Disorders to serve as that influencer in their international social media campaign, Shades from Migraine. Can you speak about what Shades for Migraine is and what that entails to be a social media influencer for them?
Well, it really is kind of an enlightened idea. I'm doing it again this year, so I was able to get on for a second time because they only take about half of the influencers from last year because they have people from Caracas. I mean, it's international, it's in other countries because, as we said, migraine is 3 times more common in women, and it's the second biggest cause of disability worldwide. Like, I sadly don't know the first one, but this is the second cause of people not being able to get up and go to work. And the things that they tell me we need to get the word out about is just what you said. You are so sharp, Cheryl. The people who think a migraine is just a little headache that you have. Now, this is exacerbated by the media because people will put into their screenplays and teleplays, "Oh my God, I have the migraine," when they only have a headache. The migraine involves phonophobia, which is like can't have sound, photophobia, when the light hurts and the sound hurts, like when the cell phone was going off and I had to answer it because I had it to get it to stop, and nausea, I would often throw up. All these things are part of the migraine package. It's a neurological disorder. And I just recently heard something on NPR about a woman who was going to be a neurologist and she wanted to study migraine. And she said that her associates, she was like at Harvard or something, they were saying, "Why aren't you doing like a real legitimate neurological disease like Alzheimer's?
Oh,
Why aren't
no,
you
they
studying
didn't.
that?"
Oh, my
Half the
gosh.
population is suffering from this. And of course, what people point out is like, hey, if this were a man's issue, there'd be
Yes.
twice the funding to come up with, different ways to solve it.
Yes, I don't think people have a clue, and I hope you don't mind that I interjected how I suffered from them because it's nowhere near what you went through. But when I did have it, because again, they were hormone related, and you try and explain to someone, I have to cancel what I was planning to do and they said, "Oh, don't worry about it. Well, come over, sit down. You don't have to really engage." I'm like, no, 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 you don't understand. Really, at times, you want to die. I mean, I would imagine with what you described, and you go more into depth in your excerpt and your writings, which again are published and part of your soon to be published book, wink, wink to the publishers out there listening. But for a colleague to say to their colleague, "Why don't you work on something legit?" As if the statistics that we just mentioned about 1 billion people who suffer from these worldwide is not a legitimate statistic. And they're not just stats, these are human beings. So
Yes, and
thank
it's
you.
interesting when she was a woman who was speaking about it, who was at Harvard Medical School, and the person who said this was a man.
Yeah, I love all the male listeners out there, but
But yeah,
I just have to say I'm not surprised.
well, you do know the statistic like fathers, a man is only somewhat influenced by a wife who perhaps has like, issues about equality for the genders, but they are very much influenced when they have children, and some of them are daughters. All of a sudden, they want them to be president and they want their migraines to be researched because men are changed by their children, not their wives. I always thought that was interesting.
Well, and let's talk about that for a moment, if you don't mind, because, in talking about your therapy and, going to Malibu and reaching out for that kind of healing, if you will. You mentioned your husband, Drew, and we forget their spouses. There are families attached to the people suffering. So what did that mean for your husband and or children while you were suffering for 5 years?
Well, I can tell you I had tremendous guilt because I couldn't get up and make breakfast for my husband and children. Like I felt that I I lost my business. I couldn't work anymore. I revived it, upon my healing, but I kept losing clients and I finally had to resign the rest because I wasn't well enough to do it. I didn't feel like I was a good wife or a good mother. And I did the best I could with the good moments that I had where I only had like a medium headache and not a I have to be in the dark room headache. But of course, children are so forgiving. I mean, they love you no matter what. They say, don't worry about it. My daughter, who was much younger, when I would have to take this migraine nap every afternoon, if I didn't take the migraine nap, it would mean for sure that I would get a headache later in a couple hours or the next day because sleep, I said, was my best friend. Sleep does wonders for migraines. But we would have a babysitter here for her when she got home from kindergarten, and then she wasn't allowed to go into mommy's room when I was taking that nap. And that's the one thing she remembers and disliked because she didn't have, access to me.
Please know that question really, it had nothing to do with shaming or guilting you. It had to
Oh
do
no,
with,
I understand.
yeah, okay, good. It
But
was
that's
terrific.
what it brings up.
Yeah, I can see where it does, but it really was to just give light to maybe the men and women out there who have spouses that go through this to realize to have a support system and to have a support team that will be there for the person going through this is everything, because that's what I sensed in, your husband reaching out to you saying, we've got to try this because it's not only a healing for you, it's a healing for us. And so let's talk about that healing. Let's talk about, you say it's a novel and emerging treatment called transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS. What is TMS, and how did you come about finding this, what must have felt like a miraculous type of therapy?
Well, I will tell you that I love TMS. I thank God every night for TMS. And this is how it happened. I was in a pretty dark space and I didn't like to leave my house, but my friend Kristen, who was a dear friend and a close neighbor in my neighborhood, came by and she started thinking, I think I can help you. My psychiatrist would help you. My friend Kristen had postpartum depression after her fourth child. And she said, you have to go see my psychiatrist. And I happen to be a very loyal person. And there was nothing wrong with my psychiatrist. I didn't have any issues with her. And secondly, when you're depressed, you really need the husband or someone or the friend to take charge because you're like a little leaf in the wind and you're afraid of everything and you can't even like strategize on how to heal yourself because you're so strung out. Mm-hmm. So anyways, she basically got a hold of this person. He wasn't accepting new patients. She got me an appointment. It took her like 6 weeks just to get me the first appointment and to like rat-a-tat-tat on the healthcare system. So I went not because I thought her psychiatrist could do anything that anyone else had already tried to do, but because I didn't want to give up on myself and she worked so hard to get it. Of course I had to try. So I went, and as he listened to me, he started mumbling to himself. I had brought my husband. He asked me to bring my husband, and he said, you might be a candidate. And I'm like, oh, it's just another of the millionth antidepressants that don't work. And he said, no, follow me. So we followed him to a little room where there looked like there was a dental chair in the middle of the room, and there was a TV. So if you're in the dental chair, you could see that. And then there was an apparatus behind it that looked like the thing that has the light when you're in a dental chair. And he said, this is transcranial magnetic stimulation. He showed me 2 pictures. And it looked like the pictures would be, this is, your head. This is your head on drugs. But it was just 2.
For some reason, I thought you were going to say that.
Yes, it is. So one is a very dark brain. And then there's one with all these beautiful points of light. And the dark one is the depressed brain. The brain with all the pretty lights is the normal brain that we all want to be normal. So he said, this is before TMS and this is after TMS. It doesn't hurt. It has a side effect of, you might have a slight headache where they have to find the exact right place. It's on the prefrontal cortex where they lay the magnet. And it's not like a magnet like a little kid, it's like It's taken from MRI imaging. They use magnets in the MRI. It's the same technology put into this machine that is for depression. So I didn't really hold out a huge amount of hope that it would work, but I'm like, well, what else? I'll do it. And it kind of went from dark to gray to color. It wasn't like I had to do it for 6 weeks. And then it took after 6 weeks, for week by week, I got better and better until about 6 weeks after the treatment. And then I started being normal, and I started like texting every single person on my phone that I hadn't talked to during my whole convalescence. And I just started living again. And my mother and my husband just look at each other and they say, she is back. She is back 110%. And I am writing this book, and it is getting to the people.
Did you I mean, I can't even imagine what it felt for you to just go week after week and you're feeling stronger and clearer and healthier, and your family, seeing that reflected in your family. And so my first question is this covered by insurance, or is this considered kind of a holistic outside of network therapy?
No, it's covered by most major medical plans. Mine was covered by insurance.
Really? That is fantastic.
That's why I just am so upset that it seems to almost be a secret. Most psychiatrists either give you antidepressants coupled with therapy, and then in severe cases, they give you electroconvulsive therapy in a hospital setting.
Please. Oh,
and this is what, the Bible of depression shows these two things in the treatment chapter. And in the next chapter, it's called alternative treatment. And that's where TMS is. And I'm trying to get TMS transferred to there. And now there actually was a study out of Stanford University in this past December 2021 for people who it's a burden to get that much time off of work to do it. They can do it in 5 days. They do a treatment and they wait a little bit and they do it again. So they found out it doesn't matter that it has to be spread out for it to be efficacious. As long as you do that many treatments, you can fit them into a 5-day period. And this man who was a civil engineer who said, I'd rather put a knife in my eye than go to work. He did it for 5 days. And he said, I can't wait to go back. I can't wait to be there. I can't wait to tell my friends. I can't wait to cure cancer.
That has got to be, or I'd imagine it's going to be part of your social media campaign as it relates to Shades for Migraine, because to get the word out of the therapies that are available. Actually, right before we started this recording, my husband he just read it to me briefly, and I'm going to go back and look at it, of a study where a particular type of medication was given to a focus group, and every single patient in this focus group is in complete remission from cancer.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, the therapies are out there. So I have to ask you, do you ever have relapses? Are there ever times where you do get an occasional migraine?
Well, I will tell you several things to that highly intelligent question. One, I do TMS once a month as it's like an insurance policy. I do it, I pay cash, it's $75. I go there, I do it once a month just because, I didn't want ever to backslide.
Sure.
So that's what I do. I mean, you don't have to do that. That was completely my choice. And then how do we let people know about it? It's a problem because I spoke also to the CEO of a TMS. Like I went to this one, it was a private practice for Kristen's psychiatrist, and that psychiatrist only knew about TMS because he specialized, Kristen had postpartum. He only works with people who are pregnant or having just given birth. That's his market. And those people cannot take antidepressants. And that's how he knows about TMS. I talked to a woman who was a therapist, and she, like a clinical psychologist, like a doctor, but a therapist, she knew about this from her patients, and she decided to open clinics. And they're throughout Southern California and some in Texas. And I said, how come nobody knows about this? And she said, because Big Pharma has the money and we don't, for the National Consumer Awareness Campaign.
That's what I gathered, actually. And, I'm trying to keep things positive because there's, so much to celebrate with you or with your healing. And I do believe that big pharma, big companies can try and keep things silent because they want to make a profit, but people are going to find out, especially when they have, you have a fantastic testimony. You have a wonderful story to tell about your healing and how, again, I can only imagine going through this therapy and going, wow, I've got my life back. My husband has his wife back. My kids have their mother back. I have my business, etc., back. And with everything you've gone through, Diana, and I think you just answered the question, or maybe maybe I even answered it for you. What makes you hopeful given everything you've gone through?
Well, I wanted to also point out with regards to TMS, TMS was approved by the Federal Drug Administration in 2008 to treat depression. TMS has also been approved for migraine and traumatic brain injury. So it
Oh,
used to just be
wonderful.
depression, and now they've added migraine. So it's like TMS has my number because it can fix both of my problems. And so I wish the whole migraine community also knew about TMS. And I know of its efficacy because I got in a car accident and had, well, it was just very bad on my head. And I was having terrible headaches. And I'm like, oh no, this is not happening to me.
Oh,
I had
wow.
to go to TMS anyways because it was my time to have my monthly little zing. And
Hmm.
my head was so much better. And so I went once a day for a week and I was completely healed from the traumatic brain injury, which is covered, and a migraine. Those are covered by insurance and approved.
You must have just been beside you. I had no idea you had a car accident in the midst of this. Oh
Oh
my
no, the car
gosh.
accident was recently. I was like a year and a half ago, and I was because I spent almost 4 years since I had the TMS, and over that course of time, I've gone monthly once. I was better, but it also is a testimony. It's like it's been 4 years. I'm 110%.
Wonderful. Well, that's certainly something to be hopeful for, that you have found your cure. You have found something that you can be preventative and proactive about if you see something or if you feel something's coming up or, like you say, with a car accident, and to have that as a treatment available for you. That's amazing. And so before we, bring this to a close, is there something you'd like to tell our audience about that I haven't asked you about regarding either your journey and what you've been through or your book or anything else?
Well, I have a real heart for the teen mental health crisis that is about now because of the pandemic. And my daughter is 15. She was 13 when it started, and she did her part of seventh grade, all of eighth grade online. And during the time that she was online, one of her girlfriends in her friend group threatened suicide. And I
Oh,
found out
no.
because my daughter, it was a Friday night, and I was watching Netflix with my husband. My daughter was upstairs, supposedly on Discord, talking to her friends, and she was teary. And she held my arm and she goes, "You have to come now. I need you on the phone." And I'm like, "Hold on, what's happening?" And she said, "I'm calling the suicide hotline and I'm not 18 and they won't take my call." So, what I want to say also is that TMS has all these studies that show that it helps children, like between 5 and 18, they can also do TMS, but it's not approved. And I said, with the black box warning on antidepressants like Prozac, like you must know that antidepressants are actually riskier for younger people because it has a higher rate of suicide or suicide ideation or going through with it. And so, with that, it makes it even more dangerous for them to go that route. And wouldn't it be fabulous if we could get it approved so that we could help these teens?
Absolutely. And if someone wanted to get information on TMS, is there a TMS national organization, or how would they go about accessing information and treatment?
It's funny because when Kristen, my friend, got me in to see her psychiatrist, she didn't even know what it was called. And if you put in TMS, or probably you have to put in transcranial magnetic stimulation, a host of things come up. There are companies out there. TMS is part of the national healthcare system in England. And TMS, there's a big TMS called Brainsway, a company called Brainsway in Israel. So it's not just America. There are other countries that are using it, and it is out there. It's just that there's not the knowledge.
Are you saying then the best way to access information is to Google it or maybe
Yes,
speak with?
correct.
Okay.
Put in transcranial, and then a new era is the one that I talked to the CEO that's in California and Texas, but the different ones will come up, and there'll be more
Okay.
than enough information. And once they read that, they can probably like parse something out. Like for example, in Israel, it is approved to help with Parkinson's disease in Israel in their healthcare system.
Oh my gosh. It sounds like there are so many ways
Well,
that,
anything that's kind of brain based,
right.
ADHD is supposedly helped by it. It's supposed to help Alzheimer's and dementia because it's in the brain and the pathways. So there's so much opportunity with this, but there's not a lot of money behind letting people know and trying to
Not
get in
yet.
the AMA. Like, you can't just get it published in some obscure place. Like, the road getting it more out there, it's going to cost a lot to make that happen, to have the money behind the study. You just had said, there's a whole system out there.
Well, I had said not yet. I didn't mean to interrupt you because I'm going to believe that, like anything that is good and right and necessary, that it just takes time. It takes time for people to find out about it.
And I'm
And
trying to help.
I know you are a fantastic advocate. You are, if I dare say, the poster woman for this type of treatment. And a fun question for you, my dear. If there was a soundtrack to your life, what would be on it and why?
Oh, wow. I have never thought of that, but I do know in book marketing that one of the you're so like prescient, because one of the things people are doing now with their books is they're also saying this is the playlist for my book, and it's not.
Really? Oh, I didn't know that.
There's a soundtrack for a movie, and of course, it's not like these. It's a book, so the music isn't playing, but they pick things like if they talk about peaches, they might do peaches and cream, or you know what I mean? You have to
Right.
go through their own book, and they come up with it, and they make Spotify lists so you can just download by pressing share. It's really fabulous. I don't know. I just think of like the sun coming back in my life. So I think of like, here comes the sun, but I think it would be
Mm.
deeper than that, but I'd have to have more time.
Okay. I think that is such an apropos song. And I'm so glad the sun came back into your life. And I will have this in the show notes, but I wanted you to give you a chance to tell your future publisher and other folks how to get a hold of you.
They can go to my website, which is dianadaniellepr.com. They can find me on Instagram at dianadaniellepr and DM me. And on my website, it has all my social channels. And I believe my email is on the website too.
Diana Danielle, I will end by saying how much I appreciate you sharing such intimate details about your journey and all that you went through for us to have this conversation today. And I am so excited about the publication of your book and look forward to hearing the good news that you did find a publisher, that this book will help many, many, many people who aren't aware that this is at the scope and caliber that it is to suffer like this, but also the redemption of getting the therapy and finding the healing that you did. So thank you, my dear.
It's been so lovely. So very lovely. And so next time you come down to LA, you look me up.
I will. I will do that. And we will sit outside and we will enjoy a cup of coffee or something decadent, more decadent than that. And
well, I couldn't drink coffee when I had migraines, so I'm like devoted to coffee.
that's why I said that, because I read that in, I was like, gosh, to not be able to drink coffee.
Or eat chocolate or
Or
drink
eat
alcohol.
chocolate. We will toast in your sunshine, my dear.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Here comes the sun, little darling. Here comes the sun. I say it's all right.
I'd also like to thank the following news outlets for the use of their clips and so aptly painting the picture of the fear that we're facing during this pandemic. BBC, PBS, Now This, UNESCO, and Some Good News. I especially want to thank Joel and Luke Smallbone, otherwise known as the Group for King and Country, for allowing me to use an excerpt of their song Together, which could not be a more hopeful and inspiring song for such a time as this. Finally, I'll leave you with the following from Proverbs 23:18. Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. Thank you again for joining me today. Feel free to offer feedback or a story idea at 19stories@soundsatchelstudios.com, via Instagram at CherylHollingVO. I look forward to sharing more stories on the next episode of 19 Stories from Fear to Hope. Until then, stay healthy and hopeful.
Together with our differences, together we are bolder, braver, stronger.